Hello everyone, and welcome to today's GG&A webinar on successful bursary and capital fundraising in schools. I'm Lana Buseman from the marketing team here at GG&A, and we are very excited for you to join us. Before we begin today, I just want to go over some technical details. We ask that if you can, please log into WebEx before dialing in. Once you launch the webinar, a window will appear on your screen similar to what you see on slide 1. If you've already called in, please hang up and follow the instructions in the window to dial in. Then we will be able to associate your phone with your name. We also encourage you to use the chat panel shown on slide 3 in the bottom hand corner of the screen for any questions or comments during the session. Please notice that we ask you to direct your questions to all panelists so that presenters and I can see it and field the question. At the end of today's session, we are going to ask everyone to take a 1-minute survey to let us know what you thought of our webinar, so please stick around for that. If at any point during the webinar you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please send my colleague Anthony an email at aholl@friendsclear.com. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Richard Bennett, Senior Vice President and Managing Director of our GG&A London office.
Thanks very much, Lana, and thanks, Anthony. And thank you all for joining. My name is Richard Bennett, and as Lana says, I run the UK operation for GG&A, Grenzebach Deer & Associates. And I thought before we start today's webinar, I would just give you a brief background about the firm and a little bit of an introduction of our two presenters. But because we have a lot to go through, I'll try and make it as brief as possible. First of all, thanks to all of you for joining us. We're excited to have you on the line. Grenzebach Deer & Associates as a firm is just over 50 years old, and we've been active in the UK for about 25 years. And over that time, it's worth noting that we've seen dramatic change as institutions have gone from being somewhat suspicious and skeptical of the potential of private philanthropy to a much broader understanding of just how important and, in fact, how transformational private philanthropy can be to a school, a university, an arts and culture organization, a not-for-profit. Now, we have a great team in the UK, and you'll be hearing from two of them shortly, as I said, Chris Allen and Claire Flynn. Both of them bring significant development experience with them to the firm. And I'll tell you first a word or two about Chris. Chris joined GG&A from the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, where he led their development efforts, culminating in a £12 million capital campaign, successfully concluded. And prior to that, he worked in Oxford University's development office, doing both major gifts work and prospect research. And before that, he worked in business development for a major law firm. Outside of his professional life, he also serves as trustee of the Liverpool Bluecoat School Foundation, so he has a good insight from that angle into schools and their need to raise funds. Claire Flynn joined the firm from her previous role as Director of Development at the Withington Girls School, where she was for 5 years in that role. And her work there included a successful bursary campaign, establishment of an annual fund, and many other successes. During that time, she also served as a Regional Vice President for the Northwest at the IDPE. And prior to joining Withington Girls School, she served as a regional fundraiser for the homeless charity DePaul, UK, as well as prior to that being both a campaign manager and doing corporate marketing and events for other organizations in the charitable sector. So with that quick whiz through our presenters today, an introduction, I'm going to hand it over to Chris and Claire to talk about successful bursary and capital fundraising in schools. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Richard. Hello, everyone. This is Chris speaking. So just to let you know what we're going to be talking about today, we are thinking of this topic in three main areas of focus. Fundraising campaigns in schools and why we think they're a good idea. Key elements of successful campaign planning and implementation. And thirdly, a question that is often asked of us, the issue of investment and growth in the development program as it relates to building strong campaigns. We'll then move on to some frequently asked questions and, of course, give you the opportunity to ask questions of your own. So why have a campaign at all? Well, it's our firm conviction that a campaign is the best way to focus attention on the strategic priorities of the school and really communicate a sense of urgency towards these priorities. A campaign is a very good way of raising the giving sights of high-level supporters and prospects. And also serves as a way really to engage with donor and volunteer commitment. A campaign also communicates success by attracting large gifts that perhaps your organization hasn't previously secured, and in that way builds momentum for the fundraising efforts of your organization. From a practical perspective, a campaign can really help to accelerate the cultivation cycle, by which we mean the time it takes to move a donor, to move a prospect towards making a gift. A campaign is an excellent way to expand contact with alumni and parents and really deepen those relationships. A campaign can represent the best opportunity that you have as an organization to really build the foundation for the future as far as alumni relations and fundraising are concerned. A campaign also can help you to put in place a framework so that your volunteers, so your board, and also your leadership are really focused on the priorities that the organization has endorsed, so that they can really go into their networks and speak very clearly and have a good sense of what the organization wants to achieve through fundraising. And of course, a campaign creates for the future a sustainable increase in support at all levels. It's a springboard for future fundraising. Now, we at GG&A are very much a firm focused on hard evidence and data. We think that's a very important way of looking at fundraising planning and fundraising success. And I think that this slide simply demonstrates that the impact that a campaign can have on really galvanizing your donors. You can see that those statistics really speak for themselves, and it really is our belief that the campaigns are the best way to achieve your goals and to really get the fundraising efforts for your organization going. So how do we measure campaign success? Of course, there is the very straightforward, seemingly very straightforward measure of meeting or exceeding campaign target goals. But also, I think it's important that we see that in the light of reaching goals around the specific priorities that your organization has endorsed. They're really the milestones that a campaign wants to hit. We'd like to think about campaign success also in terms of increasing the depth of the relationships with existing donors, so that the relationship that we have at the point at which a gift is made really is the start of a relationship with the donor. That's the point at which things really start happening, and we'd like to think of a gift made during a campaign as the start of a lifelong relationship with your donors. Another element of campaign success that we strongly believe in is in the moving towards a new level, a step change in the sophistication and indeed the quantity of data that you have on your parents, former parents, on your alumni, and on your friends. It's an opportunity that should be thought of not necessarily always in terms of financial success, but also in terms of building infrastructure and building the understanding of our donors. And related to that, of course, a campaign is a very good way of creating a strong pipeline of prospects and donors for future projects. And last but not least, in this respect, a campaign, an effective campaign, should really enhance the image and the stature of its school. It should really work as a very strong series of communications that really place your school at the very heart of the sector.
Oh, great, and I'll take over from Chris now. This is Claire speaking. Before we move further into the presentation and talk about the key elements of successful campaign planning and preparation and implementation, I just want to check that everyone is able to view the slides and moving through the slides okay. We're controlling them our end. But please do perhaps use the facility to raise your hand. There's a little icon there with a hand. Please raise your hand if you're experiencing any issues, and use the chat box sending to all participants to let us know if you're having any issues with the slides. Okay, so that all looks to be okay. So I guess we'll move forward. Okay, well, I'm taking over at this point and discussing the key elements of successful campaign preparation, planning, and of course implementation. That's what we're here to do. Okay, so we're going to talk really, first of all, about what we as a firm and in our own experience as practitioners now really understand to be really the core components of campaign readiness. First and foremost is a compelling and a driven case for support, a case for private gifts of support, which is very much tied to your strategic goals as an organization, the school's core values and its mission, and of course reflecting the unique culture of the institution and the unique culture of your school. A pre-campaign internal review is an extremely useful and we would say almost imperative stage of your campaign preparation to understand really what infrastructure you have in place to execute a successful campaign. And this at the same time, a lot of schools conduct an external feasibility study following an internal needs assessment to further understand the capabilities and the level of affinity with top prospects out there who are likely to be your top donors. Always remembering that a handful of your top prospects are likely to be responsible for raising a significant portion of your campaign target. Internal leaders are absolutely important in their role in a campaign, making sure you have leaders who can articulate the school's vision, who are aware of the school's vision. This may be the head. It may also be a chair of governors, your trustees, campaign board chairs, but certainly those who are also prepared to cultivate in a proactive manner long-term relationships and recruit senior volunteers who will speed the campaign towards its conclusion and solicit critical leadership gifts. As I say, I've already mentioned the role of external leaders. Your chair of governors and your trustees can play a significant role. Right, now we're going to move on to slide number 13. Just in case you're following us and you're clicking through the slides on your own. We're also looking at an adequate pool of potential donors to actually meet your campaign financial targets, and making sure that you have in place a series of systems to move your prospects through to qualification, rating their potential to give, of course soliciting those prospects and donors, and then moving your donors through a stewardship cycle towards repeat donations. Absolutely imperative is having the right staff on board. Your internal assessment and your feasibility study will of course determine this for you, and a lot of schools do engage with outside counsel at this stage to have an objective perspective on the internal infrastructure which is in place to carry out a significant step up in fundraising through a campaign. And of course, you want to understand whether you have a commitment to resourcing and accelerating fundraising growth. This may be, as I say, through infrastructure and staffing. It may also be through investment in your strategic communications, which are imperative. And of course, engagement initiatives of alumni, parents, friends of schools, parents of former pupils, etc. And of course, ongoing professional training of your staff. Okay, moving on to slide number 14. I'm just picking out a couple of areas that we've just covered in the key components to successful campaign planning here. And I wanted to talk specifically to what is a case for support. This is a term which is being used more and more in independent schools fundraising, which is great and fantastic. And at GGNA, we're committed to the view that a compelling case of support is vital in your campaign planning. What is a campaign? What is a case for support? Excuse me. Well, it's grounded in your objectives. It's grounded in the strategic objectives of the school. The leadership of the school will be encouraged to come together to identify, not just identify, but to articulate the rationale of a campaign to support the strategic objectives of the organization and build a very strong vision for the future of the institution. The case of support will address your critical questions that your top donors and your donors out there, your alumni and your parents are likely to be articulating amongst themselves. What is the rationale for a campaign? Why now? Why decide to launch a £10 million pound campaign during a recession, for example? What is the potential cost of running a campaign? And of course, what is the significant impact that these private donations will make to the organization? These are critical questions which, as an organization, we need to have at our fingertips. And the best way to have this at our fingertips is in an identified case of support, which is often a written document, which really serves as the foundation for all of your internal communications with your key leadership and your senior volunteers, but also when you come to a public phase will serve as the foundation for your strategic communications around the campaign goals. Okay, moving on to slide now 15, pre-campaign development review. So I wanted to talk specifically to this and pull this out of the key components of being ready for campaigns, because this is often a stage which is overlooked. And in our experience, the most successful fundraising campaigns really hinge upon this key point in the process, this key stage. An internal assessment I've already spoken to somewhat, and it can be conducted internally, a really quite honest view of previous fundraising performance. An external counsel can provide significant help here, also in giving insight into and benching against best practice, benchmarking, excuse me, against best practice of the most significantly successful fundraising campaigns amongst schools in general, to give you an understanding of how ready you are in terms of resources and in terms of leadership support, in terms of having identified a vision and a case for support. The external feasibility part of the campaign planning process will be significantly helpful in assessing a realistic campaign target. This is often where a school will engage, a third party will engage outside counsel to test the case for support in the external community among your top 30 to 40 identified prospects, to discuss the key campaign priorities which have been laid out in the case for support, to understand if they have a level of affinity with those campaign priorities at all. Sometimes the school is asked to set an ask amount. So from a development practitioner's perspective, this is a very useful stage in pre-engaging your top prospects, where an outside counsel can go in and assign a group of donors or prospects against a level which you have assigned them to see if really they have the capability and willingness to donate at that level. So we want to discuss a little bit about effective prospecting here, because this is a critical part of your campaign's overall success. And really, there's a lot of myths out there. And in our experience, and as a firm with over 50 years experience of working with schools, we have some knowledge here. And certainly, you want to make sure that to effectively prospect, you're going to be looking at between 3 to 5 prospects for any gift at any level. So when it comes to building your an adequate pool of donors to dictate your final campaign total, this is something you certainly want to take into consideration. Data, I put this as a point in its own. Do you have the data available at your fingertips which will allow you to successfully segment your prospects and to rate them, to qualify them according to their ability to give? This is often where schools engage a third party to ascertain the likelihood or ability of a prospect to donate on a certain level. And certainly this is an important stage. It's quite important to have some expectations. Every organization is unique, but it's important to have some expectation around how long it will take to cultivate a relationship. We all know that it takes a long time to cultivate a new parent prospect or a new alumna prospect. And in our experience, it can take anything from 18 to 24 months or even longer, depending on how embedded philanthropy is in the culture of the organization and the culture of the school. In our experience, it's an imperative stage to prospecting is creating a campaign table or a donor pyramid, whatever you like. And many of you out there will have obviously created your own and seen many yourself. And I'll move to an example in just one moment. But really, you want to be aligning your prospects against the data and the evidence that you have through a campaign table. And we'll just look at an example of something that I put together here. This is a sample campaign table for a £10 million campaign. And you can see the gift level down the left-hand side there and the number of gifts required at each level. And therefore, dictated by the conversion rate, which can be anything from 3 to 5 or even more if the culture, I have to say, is not embedded. You can see that for example, for a £1 million donation, you'll want at least one of those at that level. So that means you need to be talking to, having qualified, rated, segmented your prospect pool to have identified at least 3 to 5 prospects at that level. And this is a tool that we at GGNA can take out into the external community through the feasibility study process and align your top prospects against these levels to give you some indication at the end of the process of a campaign target and a campaign timeline. Many of you will have seen a campaign table like that and will have drawn up your own, but I included one here just for information. Okay, so the first point on this now is slide number 18 for those of you clicking through on your own. I've already mentioned testing the campaign tabling your feasibility study. And it's exactly at this point that you will talk to the campaign priorities. In America, this initial stage of any campaign planning is called the planning stage, and we're in the UK, we're used to calling it the quiet phase. But actually, I think it's interesting to look at the terminology here and why we would call this a planning phase. Well, because this is when you're going to test your priority projects, which have been articulated in the case for support, bursaries or capital, endowment campaign, and take it out into your top prospect community to understand their level of affinity against those priorities. It may be that you realize that your number one priority in terms of your campaign was not as successful in securing support as perhaps your number 2 or your number 3, and this is why it's important to consider this still part of the planning process. And this will be where you decide whether you will be going for a £10 million campaign or a £5 million campaign based on the results of your feasibility study, based on all the time on evidence and data. Okay, so we've done our preparation, we've engaged our internal community, we've, through the feasibility process, engaged our immediate external community and top prospects, and I think we're ready to start our campaign planning. Every organization is unique, and what your pre-campaign review will tell you is what is right and specific to your organization in particular. So really, as much as many of you out there may wish to have a one-size-fits-all, unfortunately, certainly at GGNA, it is our belief that any campaign preparation will be grounded in the evidence from your organization and driven by the data of fundraising performance. So here we have a recommended campaign timetable, and you'll see that I put some target percentage of time and percentage of campaign totals against these. This is, as the Americans call it, the planning phase, as we would call it, the quiet phase, and you'll be spending 50% roughly of your campaign time in this phase. It may be that if it's your first campaign and startup fundraising operation, it may be that you actually spend even longer than 50% of your campaign time in this phase, in the quiet phase. So these are just some indications here. And remember, it is never too late to start planning. It's never too late to come back to your campaign pyramid, your donor pyramid, your campaign table, and a campaign timeline, and have a bit of a health check mid-campaign. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit more about the quiet phase on slide 21 here. Here, as I say, you'll be setting a target goal. You'll be wanting to raise at least 50% of your overall campaign target. And as I say, in some startup operations, this may be closer to 70 or 80%, and with an assuredness of where the remaining is going to come from. You'll be spending at least 50% of your campaign time on this phase. It's during this phase that you certainly want to make sure that the changes that you've identified, the gaps that you've identified in your internal needs assessment or an external feasibility study about infrastructure or a database, systems in place to segment and rate your prospects. You want to make sure that these are in place at this stage. There's a note here about the capital building, and certainly you want to make sure that you're securing close to 100% of your target before building work is commenced. And this is probably an area in its own right. And certainly, if you do have any questions around capital buildings and the timing of campaigns, then please feel free to use the little text box, and I'm sure we'll have time to come to questions at the end. Both of us have some experience in planning capital building campaigns, and certainly the firm has a vast experience in capital buildings campaigns. But I'll move on from this point at this stage. This is the stage, the quiet phase will be when you're securing your major and lead gifts, and you'll be talking to trusts and foundations and making those significant applications. Remember, you're looking to raise at least 50% of your campaign target in this phase. And you'll be wanting to start talking to your volunteer networks, building a development or a campaign board, identifying through your key volunteers other members to be invited onto the campaign board with a specific development and fundraising remit, I should add, not just strategic advice. And you'll want to start talking to your alumni network and your parent giving committees, certainly in the most successful schools in terms of fundraising. Both the alumni networks and parent networks are active towards campaign goals, or actively contributing towards campaign goals. Okay, slide number 22. Let's talk a little bit about the public phase here. This is when you announce your campaign goal and your timeline. So really, throughout the planning process, you've been engaging with your top prospects and your leadership, and you've identified your finalized campaign goal and timeline. So now it's time to go public. You don't want to be spending longer than half of your campaign time on this phase, otherwise, in our experience, there is a loss of momentum. There is a sense of demoralization among your donor community. You want to keep the momentum going, and this can be done through your strategic communications, possibly print brochures, thinking innovatively about building projections using video, embedding video on your school website, for example. We've seen that work really very, very well. And of course, utilizing social media. There's a number of ways that you can engage and communicate campaign progress. And I think it will take a little bit too much time to go into all of the examples here, but certainly we've seen many, many at GGNA, and we can certainly help with some examples there if you contact us separately. Remember to keep the momentum going.
Okay, I'm going to sorry, I'm now going to talk a little bit about the role of the annual fund during the campaign, how annual giving that you may already have in place might continue to work for you throughout the campaign. So annual giving is an excellent way to communicate the immediate and the current impact of annual support on overall campaign goals. I think that this is a key element of your strategic communications as a development professional. But also the annual fund itself works to create the effective pipeline, the best way of creating an effective pipeline into major giving, as you consistently communicate with and you consistently ask your donors for their support. It's also an opportunity to rebrand your annual fund in line with the campaign goals, and to redefine annual giving and the case for support around that annual giving in order to create really ambitious annual targets, maybe more ambitious than you've been in the past, to contribute towards your overall campaign total. The recognition levels that you'll have built into your annual giving program help to build strong messages about donor impact, help us to thank and convey appreciation for leadership support, for loyalty, particularly with your alumni. We'd like to think in terms of at the higher levels of the annual fund, a stepping stone perhaps towards major giving. And we usually think of these gifts as leadership gifts, annual fund leadership gifts, which you might have your own way of categorizing, but we'd often think of them in something along the lines of £1,000 a year. People who are giving at this level, these are the lifeblood of your annual giving program, the lifeblood of the success of the organization, and also these are the people who, in time, it will likely become your major donors, or whatever capacity they can. It's important also to have built into your annual fund at this point, if you haven't already, regular giving recognition levels, both in terms of the the amount given in any one year, but also cumulative giving at length of time that an individual or a family have been given. I think it's very important that if that's not already built into your annual giving program, this represents a really good opportunity to do that.
And I think I'll talk a little bit here about the stalled campaign on slide 25. As I mentioned in an earlier slide about when we were talking about the public phase of the campaign and it never being too late to start planning, well, certainly a stalled campaign is something that we have seen at GGNA, and certainly I have had my own personal experience of coming into what I would have classed as a stalled campaign. Where there's often been a period of transition, perhaps in the leadership of the institution of the school, perhaps leadership of the development office, the senior development officer has perhaps moved on, changed jobs. It might be that there was always a bit of a lack of definition in the compelling case of support. A Bursary's campaign, for example, needs to tell a story as to the impact of private gift support. It isn't enough in its own right to just continue as a Bursary's campaign and expect everyone to understand the impact of what that means for young people in education and wider society in general. So there's many reasons for a stalled campaign. Recession obviously is on the list, and certainly in the last 5 years we've seen a little bit of a fall off in private support. I wouldn't panic. Here I would make sure that you're developing multiple points of contact with those donors and prospects, and it's a fairly obvious notion that given the amount of time that schools have available, that leadership of schools has available to nurturing relationships with donors, it's unsurprising that this often lies in the hands of the development officer. When that development officer moves on, then that can be a problem. So certainly make sure that you're utilizing your volunteer leaders, your chair of governors, your governors, those who have sympathy with your development aims and goals, and your trustees. And if you're lucky enough to have a campaign board, and it's certainly our experience in our advice, you should have a campaign board. You want to utilize their time and affinity to be an advocate of your campaign goals, and making sure that the contact is kept going throughout the period of transition. So don't give up. Certainly this is an opportunity actually to redefine the case of support and re-engage your leadership. And often schools do bring in outside counsel at this point to get a clearer understanding of the previous fundraising performance and infrastructure. Maybe do somewhat of a mid-campaign health check, really, just to get a bit of a temperature on the level of affinity in your external community, and whether people are genuinely aligned with the campaign goals, and whether those campaign goals are actually being communicated effectively. So just remember that here, campaigns don't fail because people fail to give, and I've included this as a little quote. It's a very esteemed colleague of mine in the US, so this is certainly, these aren't my words. Campaigns fail because people are not asked to give, or they're not asked to give enough. It's never too late to step back, take a review, and re-engage. Now we're just going to talk a little bit more now about investment in the development program, and the reason why we've included this in the overview of campaign planning and preparation implementation is because it's certainly a question that as consultants we're asked fairly frequently and comes up in forums where a lot of development professionals meet and heads and governors. So we wanted to talk through this specifically today. And I've put together some interesting data from the UK and the US which may help manage expectations around this very important question. It's important to recognize that benchmarking in the UK is very early, it's very nascent. We only have one published set of statistics so far, and another is due to come out very, very shortly from CCW. And I've put together some statistics and some data here in a slide from their 2012 survey on fundraising and development in schools. And this was a survey done about 184 schools who are conducting fundraising operations throughout the UK. And it is very nascent, and it was only over one financial year, so it's important just to bear that in mind. However, it does give us a picture of a snapshot of where development and investment is in the UK and how schools are grappling with this question. And we can see down the left-hand side here, this is a measure of how long a development operation has been at the school, roughly how many full-time equivalent team members there are. This is a median taken across the 184 schools, and therefore the total cost. So you can see that up to 1 year of a development office being in operation, when you're going to be gathering an awful lot of data from your alumni, re-engaging alumni and re-engaging parents perhaps, or embedding philanthropy as a concept. There's often one full-time development officer and a part-time administrative support. And the total cost there you can see is about £40,000. And so this goes up as you would expect over time, and levels off at around about 3 to 4 full-time staff members in a school where a development has been operating for more than 10 years. And this is another very interesting statistic which I've pulled together again from the same survey. And we can see that in the UK there is a period of relative inactivity in terms of fundraising. And this is what you would probably expect. For 3 years, you can see that it is likely that you will not be making any significant profit or fundraising income per pupil, depending on how you look at it. And in 3 years is really when fundraising activity kicks in. And this is what you would expect, and certainly in our experience, moving through engaging alumni, moving through preparing strategic priorities and internal assessment through to active fundraising stage post 3 years. And you can see that if you invest in your development operation for longer than 3 years, then there's a significant step up in your fundraising performance and your fundraising return. So definitely don't panic in the first 3 years if you see that there isn't a direct correlation between your investment in your development office and fundraising return. As you can see that this really starts to come into play post 3 years, and certainly as you can see post 10 years, there's a significant profit stroke fundraising income per pupil there. So hang in there. It's an investment for the future as much as it is for the medium term. Of course, the fundraising performance will depend on the type of school that you are. And again, this is from the CCW UK survey of schools. Again, the same 184 schools. You can see boarding schools perform significantly higher in terms of fundraising than boarding stroke day or day schools. Day schools there are lagging at the bottom, sort of thing. But this is just interesting and useful to bear in mind to help structure your expectations as a practitioner, but also if you are a head or a governor or you sit on a campaign board, to structure your expectations around fundraising performance depending on the type of school that you are. In the US, we have obviously worked with some of the most successful GGNA, some of the most successful fundraising operations in schools in the US, in development offices which have been established for longer than 10 years. And so it's important to maybe highlight an aspirational, I suppose, statistic here, rather than something which in the UK we should be aspiring to right now. But I put it in there because I think that there's no reason why we shouldn't be, UK schools shouldn't be in the same position in 5 to 10 years' time, once we build in the systematic processes that US schools have. And we can see that it costs roughly 20 cents to raise $1 in these top 18 schools in the US that we currently work with. We work with many of them. And there's a little bit of kind of extra information about the average capital gift and the average annual gift from a resource that we have from our colleagues in the States. But that you can digest that in your own time. I won't go into too much detail here. But naturally, there is a clear synergy between the investment that is put into development and the sustainable fundraising income and fundraising performance that we can expect following. This is another interesting data table that I put together based on the results of the same CCW survey in 2012. And it's just important, really, when you're considering participation, just to consider the type of school that you are, and to help you align and benchmark your expectations against those nationally. And you can see that if you are a girls' school, for example, you're likely to expect a larger portion of your campaign or your fundraising support to come from your parent community compared to your alumni community. In American schools, those schools that we've worked with longer, we've seen that that figure for alumni does grow over time in girls' schools. So it's an area to be invested in, but certainly if you're starting out in the first 10 years of fundraising, then you want to make sure that you are cultivating and talking to your parents just as much as your alumni if you're a girls' school, for example, and cultivating those relationships. And that may help you structure where you spend your time engaging the different constituents out there. Okay, so this is just a slide that I've put in here, but it may be that you all have questions about increasing participation and how to do it. And rather than go into specifics here, because as I say, GGNA has 50 years of experience, and we have our own as practitioners with plenty of years experience. So I just want to put a couple of like overview points in here, and feel free to raise your hand and to ask questions for later on. Don't miss the boat in terms of young alumni giving trends. We've seen a lot of universities are becoming very sophisticated with cultivating the philanthropic relationship that they have with their alumni as soon as they join the university. So in UK schools, we have longer with our alumni. We have a longer period of time to engage them with these philanthropic goals. It's never too early to start talking about the impact of private support. There's all sorts of ways that you can do this, including social media, Flickr, sharing information, and it's probably too much to go into here, but certainly we have experience with many of those methods of engagement. You might want to consider redefining your relationship with your alumni and enlisting your alumni association support. At the end of the day, if your case for support is compelling, then your alumni will be on board and can be brought on board to help you achieve those aims if they understand their role in the whole scheme of things. And this is really where an external feasibility will come into play, because it will engage top prospects in your alumni community and engage them in the campaign preparation process so that you're all singing from the same hymn sheet as early as possible. Again, parent giving, we work with many US schools and they do this really well. It's not a case of they just are naturally more philanthropically minded, actually. It's really just that there are systems in place that we have helped them put in place to engage in a systematic way donations from parents. This may be class representatives in a school that I worked in. Our PTA managed the fundraising network in the parent community, which tied into campaign goals. So this is something that I've certainly seen work in the UK, and the FD fundraising operations do engage parents and alumni in a systematic manner with expectations around participation and even some monetary targets. Be aware of your competing fundraising projects in the school situation. Your PTA may decide to go off and raise money for a minibus or for hockey sticks or for money for the next sports tour, but just make sure that you're keeping them aligned with the strategic objectives. And again, this is where your case for support will come in handy. It's an internal communication just as much as an external communication tool. So do utilize that. And always measure your performance, your engagement performance against your goals. They're not always monetary targets, but it may be participation targets, and to stay on top and be evidence and data driven. Okay, this slide, we're at slide 34 now, and I think we've got a good 10 minutes to take questions. We've put together some FAQs here, but actually we're probably more interested to hear questions from you all. So this is probably a good time for you to maybe type in your question in the box, which we'll see if you address it to all participants, all attendees. Probably all attendees. I'm considering that's probably best, and we'll see it, and we can take this as we go along. Otherwise, we'll move through some of these FAQs as you like. Perhaps, Anthony, you've got some you've got some instructions here.
Once you guys are finished, we're just going to open up a poll. Right now, I'll just leave it for everyone to send in their questions through the chat panel.
Okay, well, while you're all thinking of those burning questions that you have, maybe we'll just, oh, okay, right, okay, we're having a couple that are coming through right now. Okay, so let's see, what to do with the stalled planning phase of the campaign if the public launch is time critical and set, which is an immovable feast. It depends in which way, the planning phase is stalled. If this is a case of
yeah, I think what I'd say here is this is a point where you have to be totally honest with yourself as a development professional. But more importantly, you as an organization have to be honest with yourself. And this is where your confidence as a development professional really does come into play, because it's your responsibility to bring these matters to the attention of the leadership in such a way that, if possible, provides the organization with a way forward. Of course, campaigns do fail, and I think that the best way to avoid that happening is by making sure that the preparation that goes into the planning phase is as well thought through as possible, and that a feasibility process is really strongly considered as a good starting point for a campaign.
I completely agree, Chris, and I think also, I mean, if you're in the middle, your public launch is set, and I see here that it is a immovable feast, and certainly, I've been in a similar situation. Like I say, it's never too late to start planning. It's never too late to have a review and to have to take the time and to make sure that you're communicating to your leadership that you want to step back and have a little assessment, either with a third party, someone who can come in from the outside, or just yourself through your peer network, but making sure that there's some time set into that you can just take a step back and look at your strategic priorities, whether there is affinity among your top prospects against those priorities, and certainly whether your campaign target is at this stage feasible. And if it isn't, then certainly there are a number of professionals out there, and GGNA included, that can help you with a roadmap to getting the campaign back on track with maybe an adjusted campaign target or an adjusted campaign timeline. So it's never too late to start planning, and I wouldn't worry too much. It's just engage in the process as early as possible and engage your leadership with your thinking around this. Okay, we have another question that's coming from Caroline. What is the best approach with former pupil prospects when there has been little or no consistent alumni relations for many years, and plans have started for a capital campaign to be ready in 3 years? Well, that's a tough one. But certainly not a situation that GGNA hasn't seen. So I think really this is, again, it comes down to doing an honest review of where you stand. If there has been very little alumni relations for many years, and you can see that in some of the data tables I presented here, it takes at least 3 years for schools to move into successful fundraising mode, and that's most likely in our experience because they're building up their database and their contact with alumni.
Yeah, this isn't an answer to the question, unfortunately. But I think when we do see these scenarios, I think what it reinforces is again the importance of planning, but also the importance of the role of the development professional in managing expectations. And I think a lot of that comes down to making sure that the relationship that you have with the leadership of the organization, in this case with the head, is honest enough and is strong enough to be able to occasionally say, we're not sure whether we can do this, and if we can't do it now, how do we put the right processes in place in order that we might be able to do it at some point in the future. I realize that doesn't answer the question, but this is indicative of I suppose of a lack of a planning process, not necessarily on behalf of the development professional, but on behalf of the organisation.
Absolutely, I completely agree. We have another question from Jody here. I'm just aware, I don't want to move, we're coming to the end of our time, but I don't want to miss out your question. So please, if you do have any more questions, please do email. There's a slide with our contact details, and please do feel free to be in touch, and we're happy to pick up the phone and have a conversation with you. But here's one from Jody. If you have a bursary and capital campaign, but the capital plan isn't ready and bursary's plan is, would you advise launching a bursaries now when the case is strong during recession and capital later when ready and the economy is stronger, or wait? How would this affect C4S testing and feasibility study?
Yeah, I think a lot of this, I suppose, is down to having a case of support that has been tested. I think that by having a case of support that a lot of thought and consideration has been put into, you can then use that case of support to test the priorities. So if you feel that the bursaries plan is the way forward and your case is articulated sufficiently, well, yes, that's the time then to maybe start testing those ideas. It may be that you find that the response to that testing is that people are far more interested in bricks and mortar, but in many cases that simply isn't the case. So if the bursaries plan is ready to go, and there's no prospect of the capital plan being ready in the near future, then maybe it is time to start testing that aspect of the campaign.
Yeah, and I think actually seeing a question that's just come through from Georgie Grant Hayworth, sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, Georgie. A single issue campaign or menu of options case support. I think this ties together. I think exactly as Chris said, your external feasibility study process will allow you to road test your draft case for support, whether it's one single campaign issue, for example, a bursaries endowment campaign, or whether it's a range of options that you have identified as initial priorities as an institution. This is the time when you can engage your top prospects, and really they will form part of the planning of your campaign, and those questions will be answered very, very early on, so you needn't worry about them mid-campaign or, God forbid, in the middle of a public phase.
Yeah, I think I'd just say one more thing on that, especially if the single issue that you're talking about is capital buildings. It's often difficult to engage people in bricks and mortar, and the great advantage that you've got as a school is to be able to tell the stories of the fantastic things that happen within those buildings. So that's what people are ultimately going to give to. So I suspect if you're talking about buildings, well, a campaign around buildings is never a single issue campaign, even if it might seem so on the surface. It is, of course, a multifaceted campaign because of what is going to happen within those buildings.
Yeah, that's great. Well, now we're coming to the end of the time pretty much here, and so I think if there are any more questions, like I say, please contact us directly and we're happy to pick up the phone. At this point, we've come to the end of our presentation, and we just want to say thank you very much for listening to us. I know that Richard wants to say a couple more words. But yeah, again, as I say, thank you for your input and for your questions. It's always useful for us as consultants to hear the issues that are on the ground and to add to our own knowledge and our own bank of experience. This is an exciting time for development in UK schools. We have a long way to go, but we've got a lot of opportunities for growth. So please do stay in touch and email with us with any questions. And I think, Richard, it's over to you, and then Anthony, I think you'll close up the session.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Chris, and thanks to all of those of you who've signed up and been part of this session. Really appreciate your interest. I just wanted to pull a couple of things together on the basis of what's been said. I think it's come through loud and clear from what Chris and Claire have had to say that, you know, although there are core principles involved in this area and in development and fundraising and around campaigns, it's never a question that one size fits all. I think that was something that Claire mentioned along the way, and I just reinforced that. And as they were saying towards the end, you know, it really is important to use evidence to base your actions and your planning, and that's at the core of the firm's work. The other thing that I'd say is, and it was also touched on here, leadership is extremely important. And one of the ways that we as a firm can help you is in sitting down and having frank conversations with your leaders when they're contemplating things that you might think are unfeasible, irrational, impossible. Engaging us at an early stage can be really helpful in managing those expectations and forestalling any of the challenges that we've talked about and that some of you have asked about. Anyhow, I won't delay you further. Thank you again. We'd really appreciate it if you fill in this quick poll that's appeared in your chat box, and I know I'm taking up the time that you have to fill it in. So thanks very much to you all once again. And as Claire said, please be in touch. We're happy to follow on these conversations. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.